Thank you. This was supposed to be sort of a wrap-up to the story I began telling 3 years ago, but I'm having trouble wrapping it up. So what you're looking at is a visa, my family's visa, to come to the United States in 1957, the date of departure and the date of arrival in New York City. My family, my father flew ahead to begin his job. We followed. He also was charged with setting up the apartment. He chose some amazing furniture. Boarding the ship, here we are. I made a comment last time about that woman with the nuclear hairdo who stood right in front of me when one of only 2 pictures that would prove we were on this ship ever was being taken. I've gotten over it, but it wasn't easy. So I have to recap a little bit for those people who weren't here 3 years ago and sort of lead you into the sort of collapse at the tail end. Basically, the question was, where did this ship come from? This ship is the SS United States, the fastest steamship ever built. And it's the ship that we were given tickets to sail on, to leave England in '57 and come to New Jersey. Where did the ship come from? The earlier versions, you know, sails and so on and so forth, totally unreliable. You couldn't tell when you were going to leave, never mind when you would get to a destination. But with the development of the steam engine, thanks to flooded mines, we began looking at transportation changing drastically and becoming predictable. Transportation over land, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner. The problem with steam engines is that they tend to be, generally speaking, pretty heavy. So work on land was a little tricky to begin with. It took them a while to work that out. But it's easier to float that weight and carry the fuel at the same time and have room for passengers. These boats started traveling up and down rivers and canals. They gradually got longer. They created a more predictable form of transportation. Meanwhile, the steam engine itself is being improved to work in mines, to still pump water out of mines, but to lift things and so on and so forth. Then somebody realizes that if you just take these steam engines and put them on wheels, you can move them around. But because of their weight, those wheels have to sit on tracks. So you start to build the railroad simultaneously with now ships. Ships that start crossing the oceans, ships that carry 200 passengers as opposed to 20, and carry them for maybe 2 weeks. It still takes a while. And you keep the masts, you keep the sails. You don't want to, get rid of those. The ships get faster, they get bigger, they become more ambitious. One of the big changes was the movement from wooden ships, traditional wood construction, to iron plate construction. I wanted to show, to make some point of that rather than just sort of showing a diagram of a ship with iron plates on it. So I'm in the process of trying to work out the waves of the sea, transforming from structure of wood to structure of iron plates. I'm not there yet. This has become so confusing, it's almost unusable. Brunel, in building these monster ships, and he was really the first guy to do it and to really dream big, builds a ship called the Great Eastern, which was sort of bad news for many people who, for instance, owned docks, because they didn't have docks big enough for this 700-foot-long ship. Now, the only way to really fit it into a dock is to cut it into sections, as I've done here in this drawing of the ship, which is a little weird, but that allows me to show the compartmentalization of the ship, which is something you do if you're hoping to attract more passengers. Not only can you tell people when they will leave and when they will get where they're supposed to go, they'll be on a safer vessel, because by dividing it into compartments like an ice cube tray, if one compartment floods, the whole thing doesn't go down. In fact, if 2 flood, the ship will still float. It won't go very far, but it will float, which at least gives enough time to get off the ship. The Serviat was the first real passenger liner, and this is an early version of how I was going to present this. It was the first ship built of steel, and it also had an Edison electric lighting system. So it wasn't the first one for the lighting system, but it was one of the earlier ones. And it has this newly designed steam engine, which has figured out the engine, the builder, not the engine, how to actually use the exhaust from steam passing through the first piston to run 2 other pistons or 2 other pistons, and so you have not only the double situation here, but the triple expansion engine and the quadruple expansion engine and so on and so forth. Less fuel, better furnaces, producing steam more efficiently and so on. This is the page as it looks now. I just thought this is such a fantastic development, the creation of this steam engine. I want to create one of those sort of mystical connect the stars. So show it as a constellation. There'll be some labels and so on and so forth, but basically it's just another way of thinking about the engine rather than concerning yourself with all the little details. And the ship, because of the lighting system, also struck me as a more interesting approach at night to use that. Okay, so now we've got ships. The Great Eastern kind of put an end to the competition for size for quite a while because it was so inefficient. So speed took over. That became the main sales feature. Our ship will not only get you there by a certain time, but in half the time that it used to get you there, or earlier ships did. So now I'm just basically creating a list of ships. In 1896, we've got the newest quadruple expansion engines being put in 2 ships being built in Philadelphia. And it's at the launch of one of those ships, an early sketch. And the drawing as it currently stands, now that I know more about the actual shape of the hull, it's being launched, it's sliding into the Delaware River, and in the audience is a little guy named William Francis Gibbs. William Francis Gibbs was the designer, or the guy who caused the SS United States to be designed in 1950, through the late 40s, actually. He and his brother skipped school for a while and took a trip to England on the Lusitania. This was a good trip on the Lusitania, not a bad trip on the Lusitania. You can see in the little drawing in the upper left-hand corner, he became, after watching that launch, he just became enamored of these enormous things, wanted to be part of this business, and read and learned everything he could. Turbines are invented around this time, so we're moving from these up and down piston engines, which are fairly inefficient, to much more efficient steam-powered turbines. Here's an early sketch of the brothers working. The early sketches are so much more fun for me than the finished drawings, and that's where this thing starts to fall apart, as you'll see. The dog is there. The dog is still there, but I'm cleaning up the brothers a little bit. I'm getting closer and closer. I got rid of the dog and put a Morris chair in there because they worked in this little room on the 3rd floor of their house somewhere on the main line outside Philadelphia. And final drawing of them communicating with each other, which was something my wife actually suggested. She looked at that earlier drawing and said, boy, it's pretty dynamic, huh? I said, well, they're working on their own things. And she said, yeah, but where's the teamwork here? So anyway, it's sort of teamwork. It's like, oh, you're here. But anyway. So the first job they have is they're asked to restore the Leviathan, which is a ship that the Americans took from the Germans when war broke out. And this was my first sketch of it. And what they have to do is make blueprints of the entire ship because the Germans are a little miffed that they've lost their biggest luxury liner and will not give them the blueprints. So they have to make their own blueprints. So that seemed clever. But it also undercut what I thought was the task of having to go in with a tape measure and 40 guys in this huge vessel and create a whole new set of blueprints. So anyway, a different approach, keep it in the fog. Staying in the fog for a moment, the first ship that they built from scratch was the Malolo, and you can barely see it in this drawing because I've buried it behind another layer of information, which is later work of the Gibbs brothers. You can see the shape of their ship in the background, about to be rammed by that black shape on the left-hand side, which is a Norwegian freighter off the coast of Nantucket. Because the ship was compartmented, it didn't sink, it just had like 6,000 extra gallons of water aboard, but it wasn't a problem. It was a problem, but they managed to tow it to New York and restore it, and the ship had a perfectly good career. Gibbs wants to compete with all the big boys and finally gets a chance to build his own real liner after spending the war years creating 7,000 ships. For overseeing the construction of 7,000 ships for the Navy during the war effort. He builds the America. Frederick, up in the upper right-hand corner, is the businessman in this operation, and he's just working the cash, the sort of calculator the whole time, and the tape comes out, and I haven't figured out quite how to use the tape yet, but that's 2 animatable a device for me to just let go. He's letting this thing, he's pushing off his new ship as if it was a model in a pond, only to run into the war. And before it even gets a chance to cross the Atlantic, the Navy takes over his ship, uses it for, and hence the hand and the brush and the gray paint, and it becomes a troop transport ship. Okay, gets the job to do the big ship, the one that carried us, and I have to talk about the technology a little bit, but I'm trying to loosen up. I mean, there's nothing really exciting about this drawing. This is at least a little more playful, and this is not, generally speaking, playful stuff. But, you know, the connection between boilers and turbines and so on. Meanwhile, you build a model of the ship, and you tow it up and down a tank, and you watch how it works, and you can figure out exactly what the proportions are that you want, and you keep shaving away the model. Eventually, the designers have produced a plan for every deck, 12 of them, and drawn them up with this like, the army of draftsmen. We have to build it. We go to Virginia and Newport News, aerial view of the dry dock in which this thing is going to be built. I thought maybe I should be a little more precise here, so I drew the dry docks more carefully, two side by side. That was pretty deadly. So I thought I need another view here to get you started in this section about construction. So let's show the dry dock, and this is one of the earlier colored drawings of the dry, but it doesn't really show the dry dock. I mean, I also got the crane color wrong the first time, so I fixed that, but it was too late. I realized that this wasn't going to work, so I changed my angle again, sort of moved around to the front, redrew the dry dock, show the wall, the temporary wall in front of it, the caisson is a big steel wall that just gets plunked in front of it. It pushes up against the three sides of this huge bathtub, and you sink it, and then you can suck all the water out of the dry dock, and it's dry. So anyway, there's the drawing as it currently stands. I say currently stands because I'm not sure about anything anymore. The ship is built of sections, flat plates cut into lots of little flat plates, which are all welded together, and then these things, these big sub-assemblies are welded together and lowered into the dry dock, which is now completely encrusted in timber scaffolding. Ironic, because timber was not allowed aboard the ship at all. Here's the first sub-assembly being lowered in, which happens to be part of the backbone of the ship, the keel. And then in kit form, use the hand and the pieces of the sub-assemblies and start to assemble the stern of the ship and the bow of the ship and show how all these pieces come in, which is why you can build a ship of this size in about a year and a half. We finally get up to the top, and the material changes completely from steel to aluminum to create less weight on top and allow this thing to move faster across the ocean, because the idea of speed was paramount to Gibbs. Building the funnels in the foreground, maybe that aerial view, maybe this view, I haven't figured out which one yet, I get confused, or maybe this view where I can show both things. I'm supposed to now be wrapping up this book. And I had thought that my talk today would really be the kind of, you know, the sort of sharing of the finished stuff. But the more I work on it, early sketch, putting the propellers up, I try to clean it up and make a finished drawing. Terrible. It's dead. Lively, interesting, makes you really search. Completely awful. And I kept fighting this thing, and I still haven't figured this one out. Maybe I'll just cut that spread completely and do it with words. Sometimes words work for me. So we're completing the ship here. There's Gibbs sitting on the caisson watching the water pour in. Here's the final drawing, I think, of him doing that. The launch of the ship and so on happens here. We finish the interiors. Another year goes by. We have the sea trials in which you test the ship to make sure everything's good before you either both give it to the customer and put passengers on it. 3 versions of where that may go. I want you to see the entire thing. You've never really seen the whole ship yet, so you need to sort of get a sense of the whole thing. And so there's that fold out. The beginning of voyage 118, that's our voyage for which we had that visa. The ship was sort of stopped in the middle of its journey and had to pick up an ailing passenger from a Coast Guard cutter who had an appendicitis attack. And he was brought aboard the ship, and so this is the meeting of that cutter. And I have a few photographs, like maybe 4 from different, but nothing from the water. So I had to basically construct the meeting of these things. And finally, we can come to our journey, which begins by train. The train pulls into the dock, but I wasn't exactly certain that it pulled into our dock. I wasn't exactly sure when I began what the train looked like. I wasn't sure what the interior of the dock was because the pictures are all over the place, and the very first drawing I did used the wrong dock. More steam is always good for a drawing. Working on the engine, because I wanted the engine to be, I like this kind of stuff, so I wanted it to be a decent drawing of a steam engine. And I changed my point of view completely because I didn't know what was going on inside the dock, and I thought, hell, look at it from the roof. I mean, from above, and you'll see the roof, and I can't go wrong. So you've got the train meeting the dock, which is the transition point, and there's the ship. And maybe I do have it go into the dock. Maybe I want to try it from a different angle. I'm supposed to be making the finished drawings, and I'm still lost. Here is what I think will be the finished drawing in the beginning of section 4. But what's nice about it is I can bring the piston and the cylinder back, and because that's what's moving this locomotive into this thing. Okay, so very, very quickly, we sort of climb on board this vessel. There's that woman with the hair. First sketch, here's the drawing as I think this will hold up. I moved it to the back of the line. Inside, I sort of wander down, up the ramp, down the stairs. I sort of wanted to give you a little sense of the internal workings of the ship. And we see our cabin for the first time. Here's the drawing as I think it will, if it holds up. But nothing's guaranteed anymore. Our little deck area was completely filled with machinery, which was great. It was very, very interesting. But here's the view watching England get smaller in the distance, and we're on our way. Me sort of bored out of my mind for these 4.5 days because there's really nothing to do. The only thing I knew about America, incidentally, was the Empire State Building, which I could not wait to see. Gala night was this. This is my mother is seasick. This is fortunately a black and white photograph. She's seasick the whole 4.5 days, miserable. But there we are. And I sort of was going to use this as the as the beginning of this drawing of so-called Gala night, the last big deal. And that didn't seem quite fair. So I decided that I should really flip things around and have it be a picture of us being photographed. And then the photograph can appear or not appear in the book. But then I moved all the people around, got them in the wrong places. I realized that yesterday. So there we are, finally, 4.5 days at sea, and on the horizon for the first time, there's something. And it turns out to be, of course, the Verrazano Straits, and also at the same time, early sketch to this one, to this final drawing. That's Gibbs, who came to the shoreline, the Brooklyn shoreline, every time his ship returned from a transatlantic voyage and welcomed it in personally. He didn't drive the car, he had somebody drive it for him. But that's pretty much, he loved this ship, obviously. And it was the end of a dream that began standing in that shipyard in 1896, watching that hull slide away. And this is the thing I wanted to show you about the Empire State Building. This is the book I had. Look at the size of this building, all right? That's what I was expecting as we came up the Hudson River. So I tried to capture it in this spread. And you can see there's the Bowery, and then we move closer as we circle around the end of the Bowery, and we see the buildings are bigger and bigger. And then you see the view for the first time, 3.5 miles to the Empire State Building. It doesn't hold up. My dreams were shattered. And it took quite a while to sort of, come to grips with that. Therapy, so on. Docking, the drawing to dock needed to be sort of chaotic, so this is the final drawing of us boarding our Chevy station wagons to be driven to New Jersey. There's New Jersey in the foreground. There's a very quick early sketch, a placeholder. I should have left it there. But oh no, I want to show more of New Jersey. So, okay, a little more of New Jersey, the spiraling of the highway out of the Lincoln Tunnel and Manhattan in the background, and the ship leaving, because this has to cover a 3-day period. 3 days after we got off the ship, it was on its way back with new passengers and so on and so forth. So this is just a pathetic collapse of self-confidence and really wondering about why the hell am I writing books still by myself, living a life of solitary confinement, voluntarily There's New Jersey with houses. I wanted to sort of suggest a little something about what it was like. So maybe I should show New Jersey from the other side, from Manhattan. Maybe I'm spending this is at the last minute. I do this, 180-degree flip. No, aerial. Let's go aerial. And I can show you everything. So I went back to New Jersey, and so no, I'll do myself playing, and in the background will be Manhattan. I even took a photograph off that, off Google Streetwalker, and put my little drawing of in the trees to see if this would work. It's ridiculous. So anyway, the drawing as it finally was conceived, and you need to be able to see the ship leaving. So if you look closely enough, you see the statue and so on and so forth waving goodbye. And finally, the thing with the Empire State Building, it turned out to be just at the end of the railroad tracks from where we lived. And at night, the light would go on, and you'd see the light. And it changed my attitude to the building completely, because I realized that it had sort of been there all along and was now keeping an eye on me as I got used to this new, strange, very white bread land. Thank you.